You're listening to Tonebenders, the Sound Designers Podcast. Let's do this.
Hello and welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead and I will be your host today as we dive deep into the multiverse and discover worlds of hot dog hands, evil bagels, sci-fi insanity, all to heal one family's broken hearts in the amazing new film, Everything Everywhere All at Once. This film really rocked my world. I left the theater with a huge smile on my face and a million questions. In a world where Marvel and Star Wars have been dominating fandom, this film brings an indie aesthetic and a whole lot of excitement to a genre that, quite frankly, has been coming a bit stale recently. We are lucky enough to have a bunch of the sound team with us today to talk about creating the soundscape of, well, complete chaos almost. First up, we have Sound Supervisor Brent Kiser. Welcome to Tonebenders, Brent.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Next up is re-recording mixer Alexandra Fehrman, who also mixed the recent Best Picture winner at the Oscars, Coda. This is quite a run you're on, Alexandra. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Also joining us from Everything Everywhere All at Once is the film's sound designer, Andrew Twite. Good to meet you, Andrew.
Nice to meet you, Tim. Really happy to be here. I'm a fan for sure.
Oh, wow. That's nice to hear. Thanks for saying that. Finally, we have ADR supervisor Julie Diaz. Great to have you on board, Julie.
Hey, Tim. Happy to be here.
Mrs. Wang. Mrs. Wang.
Mrs. Wang, are you with us?
I am paying attention.
Now, you may only see a pile of receipts, but I see a story. I can see where this story is going. It does not look good.
What's happening?
Okay, let's talk about the first time you each either read the script or saw a cut of Everything Everywhere All at Once. What was your reaction in terms of what this film was going to need for sound? Were you overwhelmed by it? Brent, why don't you take a first run at that?
Imagine trying to read words without seeing these visuals and just being mind blown, being like, sure, I guess this is going to work. Maybe. The Daniels minds are so unique. And we've been blessed to work with them for so long that I've learned to really trust the process. They were pretty great about not just giving us a script, but giving us like a Spotify playlist of like sonic thoughts and ideas. And so we were able to pull a lot from that, as well as while they were shooting, we'd see stills from dailies, and Paul Rogers, the editor at Parallax, was really cool and would always show us stuff that he was putting together. So it was a long process from about 2016. This has kind of been on our radar, and we've been kind of pulling inspirations ever since.
So, Alexandra, you mixed it. Did you also do sound editing on it?
I did not. I just came on for the final mix.
The first time you saw it would have been kind of after other processes that happened already. So what was your first thoughts when you thought, how am I going to wrangle all this sound into a cohesive unit?
Well, I have to say I got a cut of the film when after Brent talked to me about the possibility of mixing it. I wanted to watch it, and I went home and I watched it, and even in the temp, the Daniels had provided like a pretty big roadmap about what this film will sound like. It was huge, but the film is so captivating that I lost myself just watching it. And I wasn't thinking about all of the sound like I normally do when I first watch something to decide if I'm going to work on it. So I was floored with just how amazing the film was. And then I stopped by to meet with the Daniels, and Brent gave me a little sample of what they had been working on, some of Twite's sound design, and it had already been pre-mixed. And so I watched one of the first fight scenes, and I was just getting more and more excited to be a part of this film with every step that it took to get there.
So, Andrew, as sound designer, did you crap your pants when you first saw or read it?
Well, I mean, the first, I mean, I had the script and the like kind of the pitch deck that they had put together that Brent mentioned, and what the first thing I saw of it was a long play that was still like 4 hours long, and I cried at the end of it because one, it's just it's a beautiful story. And I was really drawn to that. But yeah, at the same time, normally when I watch through, I'm kind of taking mental notes as to, okay, we need to get this. Okay, we need to think about what will potentially go into this element and all that stuff. But for the most part, I was really just trying to get a sense of the big picture, which is still really hard because there's so much going on. Once I watched it and knew that they were still going to be cutting some stuff down, I was so excited. I'd never worked on anything of this scale before,
No one has.
It's overwhelming. There's no doubt. You sit there and you're like, oh man, like one thing bleeds into another. Well, like, where are we going to go with this? But, we love the Daniels. They're super creative. They allow us to like really flex our creative muscles. And, I knew we'd be just fine once we got into it.
Julie, how are the tracks from set? Was this an ADR intensive film or?
Actually, no, it wasn't. I think most of the work lied in Loop Group, and when the Daniels went back in and kind of rewrote a few things. But I mean, the dialogue for this film was pretty much solid from the beginning, and our location sound people were incredible for that. So I had a lot of fun with it.
Something that I think Andrew just mentioned was that the Daniels, the directors, gave you a lot of space to put your creativity in. I recently heard an interview with them. They were talking more about what was happening on set, but they were saying like the film was so dense, there were so many ideas going on that they had to leave it to like the set designers and the costume department and such to kind of put their own selves and their own ideas into it to kind of flesh it out as much as they could. Did that apply to sound? Were you able to really come up with weird things that maybe they never would have thought of?
First thing we were given was the hallway scene to cut in and just get some ideas. And literally we're told, just get weird, throw whatever in. We're just looking for ideas. It was kind of great. We went in, we added weird things like pinballs on the ceilings, radio waves coming by, wherever we could find something that was funny to us, we would cut in. And a lot of it stuck.
Including all the cartoony stuff that we did there. That wasn't those were no sounds that we had to develop. Those are very recognizable sounds. But we figured, it was something that they had kind of mentioned in their notes. And I was like, well, yeah, like you, I've spent a lot of time cutting animation for TV. So those kind of accents kind of come naturally to me. And I was like, oh, yeah, let's just throw in some kind of Looney Tunes stuff here. And it totally stuck. They had planted the seed about this radio motif that we hear throughout the film that's kind of tied to Jobu. And that was our first chance to kind of just get some temp radio sounds in there just to kind of get a feel for what that would be. And then that evolved a little more later. But that scene, it did stick quite well. They didn't do too much more cutting to it. By the time we got the final, it was very similar. So it was actually kind of nice because that was one thing that we already kind of had very well established. Then we could worry about some of the other huge scenes,
So once the tracks were all up on the faders, Alexandra and Brent, I believe you mixed this together. Alexandra, what were you handling on the mix stage?
I normally do dialogue and music, but on this film I did effects, and I had such a great time mixing effects. I met with Brent, and he told me a little bit about the film, and like I said, when I watched it, I was so stoked to be on the effects side, just knowing how much action there was and how much fun and wacky sounds there were going to be encountered. So yes, I mixed effects on this with Brent at Signature.
So Brent, you were doing music and dialogue. This film's music is different than what we're getting for recent epic scores. As I mentioned, the whole film kind of has more of an indie feel to it. Brent, can you talk us through working with Sunlux, the composers, and how their music kind of punched through in the mix?
Working with Sunlux was a dream come true. Amazing guys, amazing, talented geniuses in their own right, which was very daunting at first because you're like, am I cool enough to hang out? Like, is it sure? And, tiptoeing around everything, being like, do you mind if I do this? Do you mind if I touch this? But they were amazing. And They were very humble with the music, even at times telling us to turn their stuff down, to turn our stuff up, which never happens. But it was a big collaborative process. You know, Daniels had reached out to Sunlux during the creative process, and Dan Kwan wrote a lot listening to their stuff, and they came on really excited, gave access to their whole entire library and even instrumentals. So they had that to temp in for the edit. So a lot of the music there was already Sunlux music.
And the sound design and the music got along really well from the start because of that being available.
Sunlux was brought on like before Michelle Yeoh was even confirmed.
It was during the writing. Yeah. I mean, they haven't even shot yet.
So they were on it for about 2.5 years or something like that. So, I mean, their work was cut out for them, as you can tell from the final product. They worked hard, but they were amazing.
And those whole movies all about rhythm. It was great because they laid the roadmap for us to jump in and around, allowing us to shine and making sure Andrew's stuff was able to poke through and not get lost. I think that was the great thing about it. There was always the intention for sound design to be added on top instead of just, oh, here's my music. They were very sound design minded. Julie gave dialogue to sample for songs at the beginning through the laundromat. There was so much stuff that we had to make sure that we were focused on matching to beat instead of picture because it would just really play well. We learned a lot from Sunlux as well, just like on how certain things can play with other instrumentation and how to push things harder. It was a dream scenario.
I had already been a fan of Sunlux for many years, and I didn't realize that they were the ones composing because everybody was referring to them by their first names, which I just didn't immediately put together until, of course, I started to hear the score. And then they showed up, and I was so excited. We were on the second day of mix, I believe, when they came. It was really cool to work with them because they're so into sound and sound design. They were really curious about what we did, and we were mutually curious about what they did. And it was such a fun, like, nerd fest with them. I was really surprised by that.
Yeah, it was really intimidating at first because, one, we knew how long they had been working on this before they showed up for the mix, and they were on the stage for pretty much the entirety of the final mix. Mm-hmm. And as a sound designer, you know that music wins out a lot of times. The Daniels are very musically minded, especially when it comes to rhythm and beats. And it's great because they have a great sense of what that can accomplish. But, you know, knowing how heavy this score was going to be, it was intimidating, thinking like, how are we going to like add our touch and like spice things up? Because, you know, if you're just pummeled with music the whole time, it's, you know, it will get a little monotonous. So trying to like add our color I was a little worried, but then once we got going, I was just like, oh man, they're in it with us. Everything just fell into place. Like Alex said, like we just started working on ways where we could complement each other. And it was a good feeling. And they're great guys. I'm a big fan.
And everybody in that room was really collaborative. Like it really felt like we were all holding hands. It was really nice to work with them in that way.
As a viewer of the film, that kind of idea comes through in the sound because the sound is so broad and eclectic and there's so much going on. Like there's no way this was a one-person job, you know what I mean? Like it felt like lots of different ideas were being put in the pot to stir it up and see what came out of it. And it really works and feels fresh and new. Like in addition to the plot and the visuals, the sound felt fresh and new.
Thank you.
The downsides of having that super dense soundtrack in other films, not this one, it can feel eventually like you're just being hit in the head with a frying pan. You know, there's just so much going on. There's a moment that you think is going to be a sight gag where two inanimate objects have a conversation. And there are a bunch of short little gags throughout the film, but then this one keeps going. It lasts quite a while. When I was reflecting on the film later, I realized that although it's actually one of the more touching scenes in the film, some important moments are played out, but it also serves as like a palate cleanser to let the audience like catch their breath, let your heart rate lower a little bit before the last 20 minutes of the film or however much time is left just, again, comes at you hard and heavy. Yeah. How did you figure out other spots in the film to kind of give us that pacing to let us catch our breath here and there?
Well, that particular moment was built by design.
Yeah.
It was just that breath of fresh air that you need. You're right. Anywhere we could find a moment, even at the end of the 3-person fight, when things slow down, we had a lot more design going on in that moment to kind of accentuate the grabs and everything. But what we ended up deciding as a group, like, just let's pull as much back as humanly possible. We've been hearing so much for the last 30 minutes, like, let's let people breathe. And, with the nature of the music at times, it's, they're very heavy and complex percussion rhythms, and that with little bits of sound design, you are getting pummeled at times. And sometimes that there's good intention in that to like disorient the audience a little bit before you reel it back in. So, I mean, there were a lot of moments where we were just looking for a breath. And if we could squeeze it in, we would. Brent, can you think of any specifics there too?
Well, by design, I think, that was a big thing with the picture editorial process on this were a lot of reviews to make sure that the pacing was right. It wasn't too much all the time. Our key word from Dan Kwan that I think haunts us all is swell. Mm-hmm. Swell, drop, swell, drop. And so anytime there would be a creative rock in a hard place, we'd be swell. That sounds swell. Swell. And we would just end up making these rhythms out of it that really just helped with the tension and release. So I think you needed a lot of the cacophony and build up to get the release at moments to also help you focus and find focus.
Yeah, that was absolutely the intention. And then watching the film now as a viewer, I see that that's actually represented in the full mix as well. It's kind of like it's a slow build. We have the first fight is a little bit more realistic, and we get just crazy from there. And then of course near the end with the bagel, we've got everything going on.
Yeah.
I was about to ask you a question about Loop Group, Julie, but we're going to hold on that for 1 second. Sorry, because you just brought something up. The fight scene at the end, there is a portal that opens up.
Yes.
The portal is making a lot of noise. It's sucking wind. Things are flying through it. But it's open for a long period of time in the film. Mm-hmm. And these are some of the hardest things to do, to keep the presence there, but not have it, overwhelmed, because you got to have time for the score to come in. If you want to talk about how you mix that, maybe, Alexandra, how did you keep the presence there without it being overwhelming?
So we were really lucky because Andrew Twite gave us so many textural elements to that portal. So when we were right on it, I could focus on more of like the rotating sound. And then as we pull back from it, I can focus more on like the vastness of the bagel itself. So it could feel more airy and stay out of the way of the dialogue. So I think that what we did in the mix was just make sure that it felt big, using all of the air, using all of the room, but it wasn't intrusive until it had its moments. And then there were so many things that we could use to crowd that sound space as we're looking at it. Movement and some of the darker sounds, some of the more noticeable sounds, the less low end sounds. I just feel like we interwove it pretty well, and we were able to do so because there are so many. It was such a nice full build.
We were able to make that happen because of Andrew's layout and making it so easy for us to have pre-dubs after pre-dubs sections for us to be able to grab quick things and make changes.
I think because there's so many elements that are playing out at that point, whether it's action fighting, little conceptual radio, gong-gongs, robot, the paper flying everywhere. When people get closer or getting sucked into it, there's kind of this particly breakdown. Like you see, it's Dan Kwan's cameo in the movie. He's the first person to get sucked into it. When he's like, like, so that granular kind of sound. So instead of just bombarding you with this constant, which was certainly in there, we were able to come to and from it when we needed to. But if we needed to just, not have that dark weight, we could have more on that granular, or even focusing on some of, the trees and the foliage that are living in that IRS space. We had to build out everything, so we had all those options, and And once we did, it gave us a lot more freedom than I even anticipated once we got to that final scene, because the bagel is definitely a big deal, but at the same time, it's not like your main character all the time. You're focusing more on these actions and these conversations that are taking place. And if it's just whining and droning over you for 20 minutes, you know, the ear fatigue would be insane. I mean, and it was just cutting it. I would, you know, it was hard to see the forest for the trees, like when you're just focusing on one element out of so many elements that are playing at the same time. And then again, you have music. And I think that the end of the movie really does kind of help show you that this movie is greater than the sum of all its parts. You know, it's without everything coming together and working in conjunction, I think it kind of all would have just crumbled. So everybody kind of bringing their A game from the dialogue and ADR to the music and the effects at the end. It was just a matter of finding that balance, because everybody had come and put their part in.
Well, it worked really well, because I've had to work on similar scenes to that. And as you say, it's daunting when you're just cutting it and you don't have all the other pieces, and it just feels like it's too much. And then you put it on the faders and the mixers make it work. And it's always take a big breath. Oh, this is going to work. This is going to work.
Yeah. Thank God. And, you know, when you see the directors being like, okay, you can see them nodding and seeing that they're feeling it fall into place, because they, again, we had to defer to their vision, and they are great directors in that respect. They knew what they wanted. They knew the rhythm and the feel of this thing from start to finish that they wanted to achieve before we were even involved. So without their guidance, you know, it could have really been a hornet's nest.
So Julie, with Loop Group, in addition to all the chaos scenes with million fight scenes going on and everything, there are also quieter scenes, like at Jamie Lee Curtis's desk, in the laundromat. And when I say quieter, they're not actually quiet. There's a lot going on. It's just not obviously loud noises. You've built out a world outside of her little cubicle and outside of whoever's having the immediate conversation in the laundromat. Do you want to just talk about how you tackled those for Loop Group and such?
For Loop, we brought in a really great group. They were not only English speaking, but Mandarin and Cantonese. Not only were they able to speak Mandarin and Cantonese, their English accents were also spot on. So not only were we able to use them for the different language scenes, at like the crowds in the theater when Michelle Yeoh's in her movie theater or her movie star universe, or like the outside alley in the same universe, we were able to, of course, put them in the IRS building, just sprinkle them here and there. Everybody's answering phones. It's also really funny because we were doing the Loop Group during like when a lot of people were doing their taxes too. Like, so a lot of them like were saying like the types of forms that you need and everything. So it all worked out. It was really funny. I got really lucky. The Daniels were all there to direct and they were very hands-on with it. So there were things that they were throwing out and just being like, hey, I want to hear this, like, go ahead and just like things on the fly. And one of my favorite group moments that kind of was also just crazy was the Space Odyssey 2001 scene where I had my group do the monkey sounds with zero context. That was actually one of the first scenes we did for the day. And they were like, wait, what do you want us to do? And I was like, just be monkeys. Just be monkeys. You just beat up the regular handed monkey. And, you know, it was, they killed it. It was great. It was a lot of fun.
Can we talk about the voices going on during the end credits?
Oh, yeah. So when you're in the Bagel universe, in the temple, all the people are standing there. The Daniels really wanted to have everybody saying things. We recorded I think it was the last thing of the day, just everybody just saying random things. And it's actually really hard for you to just think of random things when you're told to. But at the during the end of the credits, we put all of those tracks through the credits. So it sounds like people are talking around you. And we had a really funny review where somebody was really mad that people were talking and he almost turned around to yell at somebody and realized he was the only one in the theater. actually the sound. So it's also a really fun Easter egg.
Almost all of you have individually mentioned that the first time you saw it, you were prepared to take notes and you ended up just getting sucked into the movie. That exact same thing happened to me. I went down to watch it knowing I was going to talk to you and think about, okay, what question's going to ask for sound? And I just completely got sucked into the movie. And
yes,
Sucked.
We did it.
looking back on it, some things popped out to me to ask you, but I'm not as well prepared as I normally would be because I love this movie so much. But so I'm wondering if you can help me out with that and maybe tell me what one of your favorite scenes to work on was. Andrew, do you want to take that first?
Sure. It's that ascent up the stairwell into the final confrontation between Evelyn and Jobu. One, that whole interaction between Evelyn and Waymond, the music in that moment when, she's figuring out that she needs to approach this in another way, that kindness is going to be the motivator, that whole moment is I find it beautiful. And then you go into this really playful action sequence going up these stairs. And one, I love the flow of it. Paul Rogers, the picture editor, cut it together magnificently. So there's a wonderful rhythm. The music's great, but it's subdued. So it was more like an animation approach where we're picking elements that will kind of guide you and stick out. Like, so you feel the sword coming and then it comes into view. And then every time Evelyn goes to grab, there's this subtlety that Daniel Kwan, it took him a little while to explain it to me. He's like, I want this kind of electromagnetic charge right before Evelyn grabs someone. It's like she's bringing her power and she's about to transfer it. And that will incite the change, which is like a playful little cork pop. So the bullets change into googly eyes. When she grabs the couple, they're suddenly getting married. And the look on the face of that woman actress there just gets me every time. And then the grenade that turns into the perfume, when he sprays it, it's just this beautiful mist that we verbed out. And I had recorded these little bird chirps from the feeder out in my front yard. And it was kind of my nod to Looney Tunes. Like when he gets blissed out by the aroma of his wife's perfume and it's Biff Whiff is the actor. And he's just got this goofy look. It's like that scene, that moment was meant for that for me. And so I just built that out. And then by the time it all culminates, she gets up to the top of the steps and they're in front of the bagel and they're having their final out. Just once they really start kind of fighting, all those impacts we played up really big. Everything leading up to that was pretty big, but we kind of saved it all to build to this moment. Her foot goes down, you really feel the earth crunch. And as they're spinning around fighting, I built the hell out of those BGs just so one, it will all encompass you in the theater, but they all had one or two bright elements that would stick out. Like when they're in the forest, you have the birds. When they're in the desert, you have those flying embers moving around you. And there's just something so, it's just like a peak that just totally worked out for us. And then the music culminates and it's just this huge release. And I'm just really proud of that sequence, man. I could talk about it all day.
Awesome. Well, it played great in the theater. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Brent, do you have a moment that stands out for you?
Well, I used to say it was a hallway scene, the inappropriate sounds of inappropriate objects, but actually thinking like an adult more, which is hard for me to do at times, is the opening scene really sets a tone. It's so manic. It's so overwhelming. You hold your breath. It definitely kind of has the feel of a more fun, playful version of Uncut Gems. You're like, why am I holding my breath? Oh shit, I've been holding my breath for 5 minutes. It's just a laundromat. What's going on? This is a lot. Am I supposed to be paying attention? Having those sound moments of we pass by a laundry. We hear the laundry go by. Somebody pushes the cart by. It passes by in front, and pans left to right. Then we have hitting on the thing. Then we have different literal physical spaces with Waymond yelling down from upstairs and then appearing. And, so we're really able to play with space, location, audio as in space, because sound at the end of the day is just pushing around the air. And so this way we got to be really creative with how we pushed around air.
Alexandra?
Oh, it's so hard for me to pick a favorite scene. I think I pick a different one almost every time. But today, I'll talk about the 3-person fight in the office with Evelyn, where we are stitching together the fight that we see and also jumping universes into her other existences. And I feel like, I think that mix wise was really fun, because you follow the thread of, her with the shields and all of those whoosh sounds that morph into the sign twirling, but you still feel the different universes because you hear the cars and the traffic and the beeping. And as we go from universe to universe, there are quick sounds that let you know that you're somewhere different. And at the same time, it's all glued together with the sound of the fight sounds. It was interesting because, again, Andrew provided us with a multitude of sounds for the fight. And there were some really great sounds that at first I was apprehensive to get rid of. There were some really good hits and stuff, but what we ended up doing was sort of refining the mix down to these whooshy kind of felt elements over the impact elements. And I think that allowed us to really follow the movement through each universe. I think that's really effective in the theater.
Last word to you, Julie.
Just like Alex, so many favorites, but I guess the ones that pertain to ADR, I have 2. So my favorite one that we did with ADR is Randy Newman as Rakakuni. That just was a childhood dream come true to work with Rakakuni. And then he was really funny. He didn't understand at first that he was an animatronic raccoon, not an animated one. But once he got that and the Daniels and him started to have a dialogue with everything, he ran with it. It was and gave us so many good ad-libs and one-liners, and he sounds amazing. I also had Ryan Lott from Sunlux in the session with us, who was also kind of directing him. And then, because of course the music or his recordings went for the soundtrack and everything. So that's definitely my favorite one that I worked on. And then there's one that didn't have any ADR, and I think that was a big point. The parking lot scene, the Daniels, they refused to do any type of re-recording, ADR, anything in that scene, because the performance was already so impactful and so powerful. Our dialogue editor, Daniel Raphael, shout out to him, cleaned that scene up and did a spectacular job just so we didn't have to do ADR. And I think it's very beneficial for the performance and for the film, because that scene, that's the one that's the tearjerker. That's the one that gets me every time. And I think that if we went in and redone it, it wouldn't have landed the same way. And I'm very happy with how that one turned out.
Well, that's the thing about this film is that...
Hold on, Tim. We already told ours. What's yours?
Yeah.
Well... as you mentioned, from a childhood point of view, the hot dog hands are just hilarious. They make me laugh. There's no stopping that. But the parking lot scene, that would be my favorite scene, because what I was just about to say was that you're going to the movie for the big fights and all the insanity. But then, it has a real heart, this film, that I didn't really see coming, to be honest with you. Obviously, it leads you there. But when I first sat down, I wasn't expecting to have a tear. You know what I mean? And it gets you there. And it's a really fun movie that has a heart. And it's a fresh movie, and I really enjoyed it. And it's got 97 on Rotten Tomatoes, which I realize Rotten Tomatoes has problems, but 97 is something special. There are so few movies that get there.
And we'll take it.
I understand why it's there, because you can't leave that theater being upset. And it's also a movie that you leave the theater going, we got to go get a coffee and talk about this.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not a movie that you just leave, get on the subway, go home, and never think about again. It's one that you want to, you got to see this movie just so I can talk to you about it. That's the kind of thing that it brings up, and a movie that can bring friends together. What more do you want in life?
They knew they had finally made a great picture when they left the theater, and people are talking to strangers and having these common moments with people over their film that they didn't even know, and how this is such an important film to see in theater, so you can have those moments, so you can walk out and bring people together to be like, oh my God, hot dog hands, yes.
And also I cried.
Yeah, I've seen this
Other
movie
stories.
a million times and I still cry.
Mm-hmm.
Still cry.
And I mean, there have been some awesome movies that have come out in the last year or two, but man, like this one really reminds me, like, God, man, we need to go to the theater more. We really do. I like the idea of it going away there for a second. You know, we were during the pandemic seeing theaters closing down left and right, and I was a little terrified. And then a lot of people have been bringing their A game across the industry recently, and I feel like we're part of that group, and I'm really, really stoked that people are doing that.
It's good to be back.
It is. But also to go back to that parking lot scene, that was also another moment that allowed us to breathe, but also really demanded the audience to still be engaged because it is so, so important. So like during that scene, we made a point of like, we have really big city backgrounds, like highways, like there's a mechanic shop across the way, but we made a point of trying to wrangle everything in around it so you could truly focus on the emotional intensity of that conversation. It was very important, but also just like, yeah, a moment to rest and be like, you're here. This is it. Like all the rest of that stuff is not what you need to be focusing on right now. This is the moment we are grounded in reality.
Yeah, it was about like pulling back and focusing. And to go back to what you said, Timothy, is I feel like after you watch this film, something's unlocked in your brain, and it's such a wonderful part of your brain that gets unlocked. It's like the reminder to be kind. And I feel like after people have seen the film that they've like had the same mushroom trip as me. and now we connect. Now we can really like talk about everything.
Yeah, it was definitely a situation where I spent the next day telling everyone I knew to go see it so I could talk to them about it. So
that's so great.
Yeah, it's a really fun film. I hope that anyone listening does make an effort to go experience it in the theater because, as we've just been saying, it's definitely worth the trip. Thank you so much for talking to me today. I'm a big fan of the film, so that makes me a big fan of the work you did on it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Really appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
Bye.
Tonebenders is produced by Timothy Muirhead, Renee Coronado, and Teresa Morrow. Theme music is by Mark Strait. Send your emails to info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter via @thetonebenders and join Tonebenders Podcast on Facebook. Support this podcast. You can use our links when you shop with Amazon or B&H, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click the support button. Thanks for listening.
Are you looking for more audio-related podcasts to listen to? Tonebenders is part of the Audio Podcast Alliance, featuring a hand-picked selection of the very best podcasts about sound. Be sure to hear the latest episodes from our friends in the community at audiopodcast.org.